Happy Monday. How's it going, everybody?
Good. How you doing? Happy Monday.
Yeah, happy Monday. What's up,
Happy
Matt?
Monday, Joe.
Good. So this is we're in for a treat. We got the one and only Bruno Aziza joining us on the Monday morning data chat. Um, let's cut to Bruno. He looks exactly like he does in the picture here. It's
There
crazy.
you go. I'm
So,
I'm right there from my studio, my professional studio. Now, for people listening, I don't live in my car. I just want to be clear.
it would be
Uh,
very clean if you did, though. It's very.
it's yeah. I mean, it's fairly small, but it's a nice car. But I don't live in it. I just happen to give those updates on Sundays, and so
Nice.
uh, that's kind of the idea.
We'll get more into that in a bit, but I guess first off, for people who don't know who you are, you're the head of data and analytics at Google Cloud. What does that mean? And tell us more about you.
Sure. So first of all, I'm Bruno Aziza, and I hope this is not the last time that we'll connect with your community. To find me, it's really easy. My last name reads forward backwards the same way. So,
Hmm?
and let me take off the glasses so you can see I'm looking at you
Okay.
well. We have a few of those different glasses, so we'll be able to joke about that. But the short story is I'm French, so that's why you hear a little bit of an accent. I moved to the US about 20 years ago, and I've been in data and tech my entire career. So at Google, I run out what's called outbound product management for data and analytics. And so what does that mean? That means looking after products like BigQuery and Dataproc and Dataflow and making sure that we work with customers, partners, and analysts to make sure we take all these signals and then feed them back into our product strategy and build the best services, the best products that people want. My team also builds what's called design patterns, which are architecture guides, sample codes, sample um, data sets. So, as a customer of GCP, you can accelerate your path to value. So, let's say you want to build a recommendation engine or you want to build anomaly detection and fraud analytics. We build the solutions around that. And then finally, anything related to go to market. So, how do we grow the business? How do we build a great community around data analytics at Google? And so that's kind of what I do. I've been doing this my entire career. I've worked for super small companies, startups in the space, as well as medium sizes and going IPO, as well as very large ones like Microsoft and Oracle before this.
That's really cool. Yeah, that's quite the track record. So that's awesome. Yeah, we're here to talk today about something that's I think you blog a lot about, you write about make a lot of videos about data mesh.
Yeah.
What's up with the fascination with data mesh?
Well, the fascination is really driven by customers who, one, I've heard a lot about the term, but also are interested in solving this issue of distributed data, yet centralized governance, enabling innovation at the edge while enabling, access to secure data that everybody can make sense of. And so, over the last year and a half or so, after Jamak wrote the paper, um, there's a lot of questions around it. And the space has kind of divided into three categories. I call it the three Ds of data mesh. You've
Hmm.
got the disciples, you've got the distractors, and you got the distorters. And so the disciples are the folks that go back to the principles. I mean, the paper that Jamak had also took from a lot of theory that existed previously on domain design and work from Mark Bayer at Gardner. And so the disciples are really trying to make sure that they stay true to, okay, why did she write the paper? What was the essential problem around data lakes that were turning into swamps or data warehousing that just wasn't scaling to the needs of the organization. The distorters are the folks that are saying, there's nothing new here. And I think it's always a struggle when you're in the tech space to say, well, are we coming with original ideas every day? That's probably not true. But what we're doing is we're making progress towards getting value from data, and then certainly I don't see the ton of benefit of kind of disregarding the data mesh term because it is not 100% new. That's not helpful to the community, and so I think that's what that population of folks are struggling with. And then there's the distorters. They're the people that have a solution, a service that enables the data mesh, or at least parts of it, and they're coming at you and saying, "Hey, just buy my thing," and then all your problems will go away. And I mean, you guys know, you've been in the space for a long time, like I have. That never happens. There's never a situation where you find one product, the easy button that solves everybody's problem. So that's what's going on, I think, in the term. That's what's motivating me to talk more about it, because I want to move past the semantic debate around the terminology and all that, so we can get to, okay, what does it look like to deploy one? Who succeeded? What is the pattern of architecture that you can deploy, so we can actually make the vision, or in the theory, turn into practice. And so that's kind of the motivation behind why I've been talking about it quite a bit.
Hmm.
So I want to go back to what you said about distorters and companies kind of saying, okay, this product, just buy our product, you'll have data mesh. That's all it takes.
Yeah,
Um, I agree. Like it's an exaggeration. It's not accurate. On the other hand, I have a very strong opinion actually about how technology enables data mesh. I'd be curious to hear your
yeah.
thoughts about what role like a cloud data warehouse like BigQuery or Snowflake can play in implementing data mesh successfully.
No, I think it's a great question. I think the point I was trying to make is, it's really that one product's going to solve it all. I think if I
Hmm.
look at the continuum that organizations go through, I mean, certainly I wrote this piece on Thursday on VentureBeat about kind of how to think about the data mesh, and my observations with customers like L'Oreal and Delivery Hero and other organizations I work with. And it's a phased approach. The first phase is around, do you have full understanding of your data estate? Do you understand where your data is stored? Do you understand how your data is being processed and so forth? So this idea of having a catalog first to be able to understand that, I think, is an
Hmm.
important part of the technology stack. Certainly, having data warehousing products that cut across analytical and transactional is also an important one, because if you think about this first phase of the data mesh, it really is about building the technical foundation, and that starts with a complete view of your data estate. Having a solution that is multi-cloud, I think, is important, because you know that your data is not going to nicely sit in one place. It's going to be on premise, it's going to be in the cloud, and it's going to be in multiple clouds. And so having these capabilities early on is kind of the technical foundation you need in order to get to the data mesh. Once you get to the data mesh phase, it's more about an organizational footprint that is enabled by, no, we'll talk about that, by data fabrics or ways that you can govern data centrally without necessarily moving it. I think one of the big complexities that organizations are dealing with is, okay, I want to have these points of innovation across the organization, but I still need to have policies around my data. And so, how do I do that when my data is distributed? I think one of the things actually that's missing from the paper, the original paper, is the whole aspect of financial ops. Because it's great to talk about the data and domain and all that, but also when you talk about, budgets for compute, you got to think about, okay, how do I assign that budget across the organization? So to me, the combination, the way you assemble a data mesh is you start with the data catalog. You probably then get a really modern data warehousing product that is multi-cloud, that is cross workloads, transactional analytical. Then you move to a data fabric that allows you to um, govern data. And then, in my opinion, I think the data mesh is a step to the next stage, which is really about building data products. I mean,
Hmm.
the data mesh is not the endpoint. The data mesh is an organizational foundation. So you can become a data driven organization, and a data company builds data products. And so I think what comes after that is probably a framework that creates semantic layer that is universal. You can be tapped into by any application. So you can start building products like we talked about earlier, anomaly detection, fraud analytics. These are repeatable products that folks will use, and they benefit from, one, the technical architecture of the data mesh, the foundation, and the organizational footprint that allows you to manage access to the data, but also manage the use and the financials around the data. I know it's a long answer, Matt. I know, that's why I think it's difficult to say one product solves it all.
Yeah, completely agree. And I mean, one thing we've really tried to emphasize while writing this data engineering book is that data engineering is about technology, but it's also a lot about organization. And
Yeah,
even FinOps, things like this are becoming increasingly important in a cloud environment, just like you were talking about. And so, I mean, I've seen FinOps trip up so many companies as they even migrate to a cloud data warehouse without trying to adopt data mesh. You adopt data mesh, and it just becomes that much more complicated. No, that was a fantastic answer. That was exactly what I was hoping for. So thank you.
Oh, good. Well, thank you. Well, now it's probably time for me to switch to the other glasses. I know.
Yeah,
Okay.
walk me through this too. So you do a lot of filming in your car wearing
Yes.
glasses. That's badass. So there's the Facebook glasses. Um, what what's the cool feature on the Facebook glasses that you like?
Okay, so I love gadgets like this. I have this, I have these. I know you have them as well, so maybe we get to play. But so the thing that is interesting to me with this, so what they do is you can wear them, and if I press a button here, I can take a photo, I can take a video. The branches allow me to listen to music, so I don't have to wear anything in my ears to talk to you. If I connected this to my phone right now, you could hear, and the quality is not bad. It's not the best. But to me, the reason for why this is interesting, I think, is because it's one step closer to how we're going to interact with data ultimately, right?
Mm,
And these don't have overlay yet on the lenses, but I think at some point we'll get there. Right now, it's just basically it's a substitute for a camera. A friend of mine was telling me, well, what's the difference with having a camera in front of you? It's like, well, imagine you're not going to walk around with a camera on your
like
forehead,
the
right? So
Google glasses back in the day. Did you wear those?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
the industry is making progress. Like,
yeah.
Instagram, I think, has glasses like this. There is a
Snapchat
company
has them
actually.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, a
Hmm.
Snapchat. I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant
Yeah.
Snapchat. What are they called? The spectacles, I think.
Yep.
Um, And there's a company, I think it's either in Europe or in Korea, that is actually working on overlay,
Mm.
displays. And I think once we start getting there, you start, getting to, a more modern way to interact with data. And I think it's interesting because it allows us to kind of democratize access to insights ultimately. And I
Mm.
think that's what's interesting. I played a lot with them when I got them, and I'd say right now I play less with them just because, um, there's not so much of a use to do a lot with taking photos all the time. I mean, I'm not a teenager, so I don't take a million photos a day. I do take a lot of photos of my kids and my dog, but um, I'm 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 not as often in a need to take immediate photos. But the glasses themselves are actually pretty comfortable.
Mm.
They're not that much heavier. I have a friend who has Ray-Bans, and we're comparing them. I mean, they've done a pretty good job just packing all that technology in those glasses. I mean, differently from this, right? I love this, but this is really heavy.
It's real
Like I
heavy.
can't
Yeah.
I can't walk around with this, or I can't, watch a full movie with this. That's really maybe because I have a small head, but I can't imagine spending hours on this.
Yeah, I think I tried watching like a 15-minute movie on like a mini movie on my Oculus. And I was just like, this is kind of painful and disorienting. By the way, a few years ago, I went to the Looker office in Santa Cruz, and they actually had a demo of um, a BI, like a report in a VR headset.
Yeah,
So if you're ever down there, you should go check that out. I don't know if they still have it, but it was like you'd climb this mountain, and it would be numbers and graphs and stuff, and you'd have to graduate your way up to the top of the chart. I guess it was an interesting prototype. I think it would be more painful to use in practice, but it's cool that I think people like yourself and people are recognizing maybe these are a new way of interacting with data in the world. Like I use my AirPods all the time, and all I see is basically Apple. This is like a way to beta test better sound for when they
yeah,
have the glasses. So
yeah. This whole idea of immersive experiences. When I was at Sisense, um, we had this. We played with the Alexa, where
mm,
we would basically use voice and get Alexa just through the API, basically talk back to us with reading the dashboard and so forth. And I think, for now, a lot of these look like demos, but I think ultimately that's really how we're going to get there, right? I mean, because if you think about your dashboard or any insights that's needed inside your organization, is very much like any other questions you might ask on a daily basis to your smart home or anything like that. And so I think ultimately we're going to graduate to that. And that's why I think all these devices are a great thing for us to play right now. I mean, we are far from making this available to everyone and make it comfortable to everyone.
Hmm.
But we just, like anything in tech, we keep trying, we keep failing until we run out of ways of failing, and now we've realized, okay, this one works, and the other 1,000 times I tried it before it didn't work. So
Hmm.
so I think that's what this is for me. It's kind of as part of the big experiment, and I'm lucky. I think I'm really fortunate that we live in this world where in the last 30 years, technology has really kind of skyrocketed in unpredictable ways. I mean, can you imagine even 5 years ago, would I be able to do this from my smartphone in my car? You
Right.
know? And so when you think about that, you think, okay, what's going to happen in 5 years from now? And that's what's interesting, I think, about all these devices.
We actually set off George's Alexa.
Yeah, I
What's up,
guess I said
George?
it's funny, George, because when I'm on calls in at my office, and I have a Google Home behind me. Of course, while we talk about work, we say the word Google quite a bit, and it triggers the thing,
Oh boy.
3 or 4 times a day. And so, yeah, you gotta be careful what wake words you use.
Yeah. Oh man, especially that's probably especially cute for you then. So it's
Yeah.
hilarious. Actually, got a question from Greg Kakio. What's up, Greg?
Hey, Greg.
Hey, so he asks, should I see data mesh as a no one size fits all? He asks, do you think service providers can help their users customize their data mesh using data ops best practices, such as CI, CD governance, ops metrics monitoring, and more? So,
Yeah. So first, thanks for the question, Greg. It's great to see you here. I think you're right. I mean, it is difficult, one, to think there's only one solution and that they all fit um, the same way, the organization. I mean, half my conversations with customers is not so much about talking about how cool the technology is and how powerful it is. The other part of it is, do you actually have the organizational footprint? Do you have the people? Do you have the organization in order to actually absorb and do something innovative with the software or the hardware itself? And so I think half of the equation. In fact, I was reading Randy Bean. I don't know if you know Randy.
oh yeah,
Randy has this great report every year. It's I think it's now called the Data and AI Survey. So every year he interviews leaders, um, and it's primarily, I think, North America. And he asks them, what's the status of your organization? How data driven are you? Do you have a chief data officer? What are the barriers to innovating and so forth? And the thing that's always interesting is 90% of respondents say that culture and internal political aspects of the organization are really the number one barrier to innovating with data. And
mm,
so when we think about all these topics, I can't read because it's small on my phone, but I think it's governance, metrics monitoring, API, UI, catalog management, all of those, there is a solution, technical solution for it. The key is, do you, one, have the organizational appetite, and then you have the maturity,
yep,
have you organized yourself so you can effectively implement those things? And I think those are unique by company. Last year I ran this survey where I was asking, what is the right number of data people you should have inside your organization as a percentage? Because I work with organizations like Wayfair, 3,000 data scientists and data analysts out of 18,000. I think that's their 18% or 16,000, I think. Uh, Out of their entire employee base, 18% of them are data people. That drastically different from many of the organizations that are trying to innovate with data where they just don't have the people. And so I think just a long way to tell you, Greg, that yes, it is not one size fit all, and it really is highly dependent on how you're organized and the type of leadership you have around data innovation. I might have gotten too excited about this question and over answered it, so but you guys keep me honest on this.
well, it's something we see a lot too. I think there's, I think we'll get into this in a bit. Data mesh, I see, is a very, it's a polarizing topic for sure.
Yeah,
It's either you love it or you hate it. I don't know a lot of people in the data space who are like, who don't have an opinion
neutral.
on it. Yeah,
Yeah,
But at the same time, for the companies that are bullish on it, I would say it really does come down to what you're saying, the organization, the maturity, because this is a
Yeah,
pretty fundamental shift, right? And so
yeah,
things like Conway's law and just basic organizational dynamics, I think, but that's like any transformational thing, right? It's like, I think,
yeah,
as you point out, if there's one technology to solve it, well, there'd be no reason for any of us to really have a job. It's already solved it. So we'll just go do something else, right? Like, you know, but we're all here precisely because it's that
exactly.
hard. So,
Yeah,
yeah, why do you
and
think
it's
data mesh is polarizing, by the way? I want to get your take on that.
why.
Hmm.
So, so I think it is polarizing right now. I mean, I've seen, so I get a lot of comments on LinkedIn and so forth, and 99% of them are positive and supporting because I'm lucky I've built a community of folks that are motivated to kind of learn from each other. But the comments that are polarizing typically tend to be around, particularly on the topic of data mesh, around credit. Who should get credit
Mm.
for the idea? And I don't know how to feel about that because sure, we can all trace back to the inventor of the database if we want to. I mean, we can all go and give credit to that, but I just don't know how that helps the the debate. I mean, for
Yeah.
sure, you got to give credit when credit is due and so forth. But I think if you do look at the data mesh paper, it's very clear who wrote that first.
Right.
Um,
Like
where
literally,
there
literally, the author's name is on it. So.
Right. So it's difficult to say, well, that wasn't the first time this concept was. Okay, great. So someone before talked about the value of distributed data, and that's great. And we should also quote them, but, is it helpful? So I think
Mm.
that's one where, the obsession over this credit thing, I think is not particularly helpful. The second thing I think is problematic is the obsession around the semantics themselves. So,
Yes.
for instance, we had this debate a few weeks ago. People saying, "Oh, friend of mine, Andrew Brust, wrote this paper on the difference between data mesh and data fabric." And you got all this, part of the community to start arguing. Well, the data fabric is this, the data mesh is that, and they're not the same. And interestingly enough, I had done a survey where most people don't think they are the same.
Mm.
But what people failed to do is they failed to actually read Andrew's article, which was super interesting around, okay, now that we've kind of put this issue around data mesh versus data fabric, let's talk about a few topics around data value. What's the problem we're trying to solve essentially,
Yeah.
right? Let's go back to, and so I think that's what the polarizing comments are taking away from the debate, which is one, why did we even start talking about it? What's the crisis that we have here?
Mm.
Because the reality is that 70%, almost 70% of organizations cannot get value out of their data. So we got to go back to that. That's the problem. And then second is, let's move off of the meta conversation and let's now go to what architecture designs can we share? What customer examples can we share and expose so we can effectively succeed and create your data mesh at your company? It's yours, right? It's your career, it's your company, it's your business. So there's some guidance you can take from the community, but ultimately your success is highly conditioned to your ability to actually deploy it in real life rather than just spending hours debating, should you call it data mesh or not. And so for me, I tried to expose more of that. The CIO of L'Oreal wrote a two-part blog about how he thought about data mesh, how he organized himself, and it's a great blog. I really recommend everyone to kind of go and listen to the practitioners there. And then Eric Broda, who has some great design patterns and architecture examples of how to deploy the data mesh in practice. That's what I'd rather spend time on because
Mm.
I think that's helpful. Uh, Even to not over answer your question, but the reason for why I started doing those car casts every Sunday from my car was really motivated. One, it's just almost 2 years ago. A chief data officer was telling me, there's so much noise in this industry. I wish someone could break up in 5 minutes what really mattered this week. And so I said, I'll just give it a shot and I'll do it in a format that's easy for me to do. I'll just do it from my car. And that became so popular, I just kept on doing it. So I'd rather we just focus on that. Like, how can we help each other? I learned a ton from the people reaching out to me throughout the week and kind of sharing with the community what they shared with me. I think that's probably better than, hey, who should get credit for the term, and
Yeah,
you know.
I agree because the data space, you know, I always see. So I see content and ideas as very much a zero sum game, right? But
Yeah.
I find these kind of you know, credit taking shenanigans is very much kind of, you know, a fixed sum, zero sum game, right? Like, you
Yeah.
know, I win, you lose kind of thing. That's not like that, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, we're all here to push each other. We all have different ideas, and I think that's what makes us great. If we all have the same ideas, it's the same as a one tool to rule them all. Then what's the point? We may as well do something else. So,
Yeah.
you know, there's nothing more to push. But the fact that this is a really hard space to, you know, I mean, I wager that a lot of the problems you see with data are a lot of the same problems you probably saw back in the day when you got started. Like if you get into the root causes, right? And it's very few times is that technical.
You know,
So
it's funny you said that because um, I find myself talking to data leaders now about some of the stuff I discovered when I wrote my first book on
mm,
it's called Drive Business Performance. And at the
mm,
time, we had this rule, like we had come out with 10 rules on how to build uh, a culture, a data culture. And I've gotten so many questions now that I have my slide where I say, okay, here are the 10 things. And we often start with that with chief data officers where, you know, they're less worried about the technology because they know we've got it. They know that we are building innovative technology. We know that we are, you know, probably one of the most modern options for them and the most open options for them. And so they're less worried about that piece. What they're worried about is that help me with how I organize myself. Help me um, with the stuff that, you know, is more about people and communication. We joke that the problem with data is that the hard stuff is the soft stuff, right? The three of us
mm,
are data nerds, right? And so everything's logical and everything is a system, right? So to figure out the system, you know, it just goes through a routine, and then if it fails, it starts, and then it modifies, and then goes to a different path, and then ultimately, it's all the result of logical routines. And the reality is that success in this field has a huge component of emotional intelligence that you actually, I think, have to codify in your strategy when you're deploying your data mesh, data warehousing strategy. It doesn't really matter. What I mean is, as a tech leader, as a data leader, we often forget about the people aspect. So I'll give
yep.
you one example. A discovery we had when we wrote the first book, which I talk to customers about all the time now, is do you actually have a brand for your initiative? And the reason for that is because if you want people to rally behind a concept, you should have a code name, you should have a logo, you should have a thing that is sticky enough so people can go back to and say, oh, you know what, this initiative is code whatever. One, it's cool. Two, it gives it an identity. And so the minute now you have an identity with the project, you can now create not a franchise, but you can create a visual reminder of it everywhere. For instance, the CIO of Rackspace, Juan, who you probably should have on this show, he's a very
Mm,
knowledgeable guy. Worked at MicroStrategy before, and he and I have spent a lot of time together because he's innovated quite a bit. Naturally has a brand, and he uses that on his certified data sets, right? So that he's got a data exchange he's built inside the organization. And it's interesting because the brand is representative as part of the project itself, but also has a logo. So you know, okay, when I'm using this data set, it is certified. It's the right data set.
mm.
And so you rarely think about that as being an important part of your approach, but it's a great reminder for people across the organization of what it is you're trying to do here. You're trying to change behaviors. You're trying to create helpful habits that permeate across the organization. Another leader that's someone people should know about, Di Mays. She is the head of infrastructure at WPP. She's
Mm.
trained thousands of people internally, and it's the same thing. A lot of tactics like that on tapping into the emotional intelligence of people that, you know, otherwise you would have thought are very logical or rational. You can convince them rationally of your process, yes, and also you should think about emotional intelligence because they're people.
Very much so. Actually, got a question here. On that note, from Mike Nash.
Yeah.
So, Mike, he asked if you want to move a client to data mesh infrastructure rather than data lake or a silo approach or a lake silo approach. What is the best approach to win them over when they are stuck in the past?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thanks, Mike, because Mike is very active. He sends me a
Awesome.
lot of great research
Yeah,
as
he's
well.
awesome.
Um, and so I think the first issue of the data lakes, one, I guess forget the technology limitations. I mean, when I was at scale, we focused a lot on the concept of the data lake being an important concept for storing data at scale in distributed manner and doing it in a cheap way. But the problem was performance was really an issue, and we had created this um, interface in front of Hadoop that had intelligent caching and all these things that would enable kind of the data lake to become a workable solution for BI workloads. So if you move past that, the other issue with data lakes has been that hasn't really been connected to the domains, right? The traditional data lakes, architecture we've seen in the past have been IT led, have been, hey, dump all the data there because it's cheap, and then we'll focus on building the use cases on top of that. And then surely enough, what we realize is that setting up a data lake in the way that scales and the way that is governed and has performance, all the attributes you're looking for to be able to actually build effective use case of workloads on top of it, they were missing. And so now you had to have like gurus of data lakes to actually build. So it was hampered by just a few folks. Even though the technology was great, it was gated by data scientists, data engineers that were the only folks that knew how this thing worked.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore they were the only ones that could actually build the use cases that were helpful to the business. And so they became what many of us have called data swamp, because well, if it takes you that much time to create a use case on top of your data lake, people just stop being engaged with the data. Data becomes stale, data becomes inactive, and now it's a bummer because we've spent a lot of time believing in that, and it's not working out. And so I think the data mesh architecture is addressing this very problem on how do I include the domain-based thinking early into the process, so I'm not stuck in this IT versus the business thing where I'm business and IT working together, and the central way of governing the data and so forth takes from the domains as well. And you have figured out a way to create independence and autonomy for domain-based data while the central, if you will, model is working with it. And so I think that's the shift. That's why, when people say, hey, there's nothing new here, I think that's a little disingenuous because there's something new here, which is if we had succeeded with data lakes, we wouldn't be talking
Mm,
about data mesh now.
right.
Right. And so there's a shift there. And in fact, if I remember correctly, I think the first paragraph of Jamak's paper talks about this problem of the data swamp. I think she actually uses that term.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I would go to. I guess you could call me as in the category of the disciples there, which is whenever in doubt, go back to the original paper, read that, and then look for customers like Francois at L'Oreal or like Eric Abroda, like I named earlier, who have like firsthand experience with this, and they can tell you what their experiences are.
I think that's a fantastic answer. And I think the other thing that I'd like to emphasize is that one of the problems with perception of data mesh is that it's too complicated. And I
Yeah.
think engineers and software developers like to overcomplicate everything. Like,
That's our
why don't
job.
we build our own stack rather than using something off the shelf? And so I think one of the ways to sell data mesh is to make it simple. So, for example, most teams probably shouldn't be writing, native Spark to run their data processing. It probably should just be SQL of some sort, whether that's Spark SQL, BigQuery, Snowflake, something like that. I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the complexity problem with data mesh, especially the complexity of the tools.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something here. I think that's very true of our industry is that um, what is great about our industry is we have a very large number of super smart people. And that's how we innovate, right? Is because they go off and then they build these sophisticated systems and they go out and solve some of the biggest problems, right, in the industry. But the bad news about that is that sometimes we go to complex before we go to simple. I think half of the problems that I see is because we thought really long and hard about solving a very hard problem in the most complex, most sophisticated
Mm.
way that would
Yep.
scale forever and do all these things. But then we didn't think about, wait a second, maybe if I just break up the problem and let's do one step at a time, let's solve this very simple, essential problem. And the problem with I think the complex design and the complex answers to sophisticated questions is that, um, it ends up creating a lot of um, I don't want to say legacy, but a lot of problems that are hard to undo once you've realized kind of maybe you went too fast, too
Yeah.
far. Um, it's kind of like it's forgetting the Pareto rule, right? The 80/20 is that if you could just spend 80% of your time on the 20, what would that be? And that's kind of what I tell my teams and what I tell my customers all the time is problem is this big. We get it. It's a gigantic problem. What is the 80%? You know, um, that of your energy that you want to spend on the 20% that is probably going to move the needle the most. You can't possibly, you're not going to have the time, the money, and the resources to apply equal time to all the problems of this environment. And so you're going to have to make an, informed or intelligent trade-off on focus on the thing that you think if you just did that one thing, you know, does it have you know, what I'm struggling to find the term. Does it have disproportionate? That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Does it have disproportional impact on the rest of your strategy? And we don't do enough of that because we typically are surrounded by super smart folks that just have the ability to design very complex solutions.
Well, the thing is, you,
Um,
you have very limited political and social capital in an organization, right? If you're given like, say, the equivalent of like $20, how are you going to spend this? Um, and you're not getting a dime more. So figure this out. So what we see a lot is, I think people want to be very overly ambitious and overcomplicate things, and then it ends up, the stakeholders, they have to
yeah,
work with it. Like, what we've made no progress on this. It's overcomplicated. When are we going to get going on this, right? And
yeah,
so, it's also to say that the time is ticking on you, so use it wisely.
yeah.
So,
We have this exercise that we do with customers we call the stack rank. And
mm,
so every month we meet with our customer community. It's a worldwide community, and we ask them just like very much like you said. We don't give them $20. We give them $10. So maybe we should
mm.
increase the.
Well, it's inflation now,
Inflation,
But,
yeah.
so
but the idea is similar, right? Which is you only have $10. How would you stack rank those features? Um, but also it's the why, right? I think what's for me the interesting aspect of the question is not so much don't give me the answer. Let's go back to the why
yep,
we're doing this, because what I found is the problem rarely changes. It's the way we apply the solution
so true.
that evolves. It's kind of this idea of who was I talking to? I think I was talking to Bernard Marr about he was telling me, oh yeah, I'm just amazed at self-driving cars. If you think about how we've gone from horses to, uh, you know, actual cars, to self-driving cars, and so forth. And it was a great analogy for me. It was like the problem, and then we're going to this,
Right.
and because I think the problem was we were trying to spend time with other people. Ultimately, right? We're trying to have an experience with people that are not where we are. And then originally we tried to just change that physically, by moving with the horse, then move more rapidly. And now, we don't like to drive for a long time, so we are going to have the machines drive for us. And then ultimately, we don't move at all, right? We have now the impression that we're moving by, physically going there. And so I think that's kind of, if you're a data leader, before you start kicking off your data strategy projects, do a really good job asking the why and be really clear that you start your strategy by first slide probably should be problem statement. what is the problem that we think we're all solving for? And spending a little extra time on that is probably the best way I think to align everyone. I mean, I was just talking to a customer on Friday who was telling me, "Oh, I need to operate this particular migration," and my first question was, "Why?"
Mm-hmm.
Tell me, and it sounds trivial. It's like, well, because the data needs to move to. Okay, no, but why is like, what is it preventing you right now? And what are your principles? Because one thing that can align everyone is that if you issue a set of principles, when people don't know and you're not there, they actually have something they can hang on to in order to make a decision. Um, and so I think these two steps often we forget, and they're essential to the success of your data strategy.
So I've got a question here from Tristan Baker. It's kind of a long question, so I'll summarize it. Basically, he's year, one out of three in his journey for data mesh. Um, he basically says that teams are disconnected between people who produce data and sorry, it's it kind of
No, I
crowding
can't
you
hear
out, or
you. I can't hear you.
oh,
Yeah,
can you hear me,
do you
Matt?
mind repeating the question? Now
Yeah.
you're back. Yeah.
Okay, sorry about
Okay.
that. I don't know what happened. Yeah, basically
I
he's
think it's my
saying,
car. I think because I'm not driving, it just probably went
Ah,
into sleep mode.
okay, sleep mode. That's awesome. Basically, what he's asking is, do you have any ideas for incentivizing um, various teams to recognize that they're both producers and consumers
Mm.
of data, and to put their effort behind building data products instead of infighting about who produces and who consumes data? That's basically what he's asking.
Wow. Okay. So this is an interesting one. I'm trying to read it, but it's small.
It's a
Incentivize.
lot of, it's like a huge paragraph, but yeah, I tried to
Yeah,
summarize it
yeah.
for you. So
I'm just trying to think about like what kind of incentives you would have to create. I don't know if Tristan can answer us, but is this a problem at your company where you're finding that people are not motivated to create content, or because one of the issues that we see is, of course, like any community, 90% of people are watching. I think it was Infosys or that did some research around how communities work, and the bottom line was that 90% of people were just observing, and 8% of people were actually taking time to read the content and so forth, and 2% were actually engaging, or some ridiculous number like that.
mm,
And so it sounds like the question behind the question for Tristan is, how do I get people to actually engage and contribute to the data strategy? And so I think the first probably is to realize that it's not going to be 90% of your team that actually is going to contribute uh, to the data strategy. And so it's difficult, and so you have to ask, why is that? Is because they don't have the maturity, they don't have the tool, it's not part of their job. What are the reasons behind why they're not contributing? One of the things that we've noticed at organizations is they create this concept of the black belt inside the organization. So
mm,
they have teams. Uh, so let's imagine that you have an organization that has centralized IT team, but you also want to embed people in the domain so you can have innovation. But these folks in the domain, they don't report to you as a chief data officer, and they're not really data people. They just work with the data, and they're not interested in becoming a data engineer or anything like that. What customers have done is they've created this concept of the data black belt, where you are a representative, let's say in marketing, sales, ops, HR, of the data practices inside your organization. And then you take on goals around enablement, around contributing back to the system design and so forth. So that's it's not exactly an incentive, as you're not paying people, but you're recognizing them for their status and their impact. It was
mm,
I think Napoleon that we used to say that soldiers, would go to battle because of the recognition on their shoulders. And I think it's a little bit of that is, are you doing everything you can to recognize the effort of, a few special people, I would say, that are interested. Um, I think trying to convince people who just not interested in it, and so forth. Especially when they're far removed from you as the chief data officer or any of that. I think that's just really hard, and your expectations should be kind of more like what I said, which is 98 and 2, where if you've got 100 people, there's probably 2 that you want to have lead, and then 8 that probably will engage, and then the rest where it's just they're observing, but
Mm.
they're not able to participate actively. It's not their job. They don't have the skill set. Not interested in it. But at least they're informed.
Mm-hmm. Got a question here from Bharat Sharma. He asks, in data mesh, how do you solve the problem of different groups requesting access to data, or the workflow of requesting and approving access to data?
Yes, yeah, this is a great question, and that's part of the issue of domains, right? Is how do you manage? I think it was Fidelity that calls it data neighborhoods.
Mm.
Carrefour calls it data hubs, and what they've done is they've used so I'll talk a little bit about one of the products that we have called Analytics Hub. And the Analytics Hub is think about it as a data sharing platform where you can publish exchanges where people can get access to data. Um, Now, when we talk about data sharing, we often go to data monetization. We're like, immediately, I need to create a platform so people can create data sets and sell them. It turns out that when we looked into it, the number one issue that organizations are dealing with is exactly kind of what this question is about, which is how do I manage at scale the process around sharing data securely? And so concept of data hub here is an interesting one because you or Analytics Hub is we're not making data copies, right? And I think the problem with giving data to people is that now one you're making copies of data, which costs you more in process and storage and all that. Um, but also it's really hard to regulate and police, right? So once I gave Joe and Matt some data and then they go off and use that data, well, what do I need to do when the data is out of date, or
Mm.
maybe the data needs to be retracted? And so having a framework that allows you to do that, where you don't make a copy of the data, but you create a view into that exchange, and you can lock people out or let them in, is a much more effective way to do this at scale. And then also you don't have to create, multiple copies of the data, so you don't pay for them multiple times. And so that's how I think this problem is solved: is having modern frameworks for doing data sharing the new way, right? In the old way of data sharing, beyond just the data copies, you also had this idea that I would deliver to you data, and now you got to do work on it. So we also have to evolve beyond just giving a data copy to someone to actually giving them an analytic solution. So instead of just giving you, here's your customer data, maybe I can give you, here's propensity information on top of your customer data that I ran using that model. The old way of doing data sharing was kind of like giving a gift card for Christmas, right, to your friends, like, here, go run an errand. um, and it's nice thought, right? It's a great first step. I mean, I've given gift cards, so I'm guilty of that as well. But
It's only
I think,
$20 though, so.
yeah, exactly,
That's
exactly. But the space that we're in now is I should actually be able to, okay, if marketing is asking for customer data, what are they really asking for? Are they asking for propensity to buy, affinity? Okay, I'll give them that, plus I give them some additional service on top of it, so they can get closer to their goal.
So data mesh is not, the future of it is not emailing Excel files to people.
I
Yeah,
don't think it is, no.
Okay. All
EDI
right.
forever.
We're in the wrong business, man.
Yeah.
All right. Just kidding.
One of the curious things about the history of BigQuery actually is that it was originally envisioned as a sharing platform. There was this
Yep.
project at Google,
Yeah,
like, how can we let people share data? And so at first it was just like, well, we can use object storage. But then, just like you were saying, Bruno, there was this realization, well, if people can't query the data, then it's really not going to be consumed. So let's put the
yeah,
querying right in with the sharing layer. And I mean, frankly, I think Snowflake was conceived with something similar in mind.
yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point because we don't talk enough about that. Data sharing was part of BigQuery since day one. In
Yep.
fact, I don't have the stat in front of me, but when we announced Analytics Hub, we reminded people that any week we have thousands of organizations sharing data using the platform, and so And it kind of makes you think, the way BigQuery is used by, so many organizations is they have extended beyond what a traditional data warehouse is. I mean, I think the way the industry has kind of gotten to where we are now is essentially taking the construct of on-prem data warehousing and putting in the cloud and taking advantage of that. That's not how BigQuery got there. You know, BigQuery was about sharing data, processing data at massive scale, and was optimized from day one as a system that allows you to go from very sophisticated questions and very simple answers where you don't have to run a sophisticated system. You don't have to think about creating indexes. You don't have to think about, oh my gosh, how much data can I throw at this thing? Because the design was, well, we have really complex problems, and we'd rather figure out how we can just remove the limits so we can provide the answer quickly. In fact, that's kind of, I think, the secret sauce that we rarely talk about is how do you go from sophisticated problems, sophisticated questions to simple answers without losing the sophistication? Because it's easy to say, I have a sophisticated question, I give you a sophisticated answer.
Right.
I have a simple question, I give you a simple question, simple answer. But it's difficult to go from sophisticated situations to simple answers. Google.com is a great example of that, right? You've got a great, simple white page where all you do is type in, your query, if you will, and then, but behind that white page is the world of the internet, fast growing, disconnected data of all types, audio, video, text, changes all the time. Um, Yet the answer you're going to get is highly personalized at a massive scale. And so that's, I think, the principle that and that's why it makes us Google, and that's why we're different, I think, is because that's the problem we try to focus on. And interestingly enough, 10 years ago, I think data leaders weren't thinking about their environment like that, but now they are. This idea of, you look at, was it the big data landscape that was created, that was all these logos and these companies and so forth. In 2012, when this was launched, you could see the logos of the companies and categories. You look at the version from last year, you could barely tell the category names. It's a complete. So
Are
if
you
you're
talking about the
chief
data
data officer,
landscape?
Matt
yeah,
Turks, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's insane.
Matt's done a great job, right? Just if you will, documenting all the companies. But imagine if you're chief data officer, you're looking at this like, okay, where do I? This is my ecosystem. So, and that is the equivalent to me. Is the equivalent of the internet. Like if you were to just look at the
Mm.
internet like that, it would look like the data landscape, which is you can't make sense of anything. But
Oh,
luckily, there's artificial intelligence and algorithm and companies like Google that will say, okay, I will make sense of this for you. And I think that's what data leaders need
I
in the
remember when I
enterprise.
first got online back in the early '90s and mid '90s when the browser came out, Mosaic. I remember you could
Yeah.
actually get a phone book of websites. They would mail you a physical book. I think I have one somewhere, which is probably a collector's item now, actually. So, but that it's very similar. So I remember the data landscape in 2012, looking at that slide, and I was like, this. There's a lot going on here. Now it's
Yeah.
like I don't even know where to begin, and I
How little
imagine
you knew, right?
recruiters will be asking for 15 years of experience with every single technology and Matt Turk's slide. So, it's
Yeah.
it's just nuts. Um,
A book of the websites. You're taking me back to the Minitel days when I
yeah.
was a kid.
Oh, we were
I
talking
think
about that last night. Actually, that was
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah.
France invented the internet. No, not many people know that. Um, and when I was a kid, was when the government sent every household this little computer that was connected to the internet, and the killer app of it was looking through the yellow pages. And of course, at the time, my grandparents, would pay for the Minitel, and then the way you connect to the grid, if you will, the internet was you pay by the minute. And they made the mistake of giving that Minitel to me, and then I just hack at it, played games. I can't remember all I did. And after a month, they actually took the Minitel away from me because I racked up their their telephone bill
they're still paying it
by a
off.
factor of 10x. And they're like, okay, we're giving this back to the government. You are no longer getting close to a computer because you're going to cost us a lot of money. And then when I had my own savings, I bought myself my first Amstrad computer. My mom
Mm,
was really upset at me when you used to put the tapes in
I
to
remember
load the
those.
games and all that. So yeah,
That's funny.
we've gone a long way. And
I
now I'm
used to
talking to you from your phone.
Yeah, from the phone. Well, speaking of phones, like I remember back in the day, and I don't know, Matt, what your experience was, but bulletin board services. So I racked up, I don't know, countless amounts of money in long distance charges just connecting to bulletin boards because you didn't have really a web back then, right? So you would get stuff off
Yeah.
bulletin boards. This was by the early 90s and stuff, or late 80s, but um, yeah, and then having some, email is an interesting one too, because you were like one of probably like 3 people that you knew who had an email, if even that, right? So you just email people
Yeah.
to say, hey, I'm just writing an email because I'm weird and want to use this. So, but yeah, everything's changed. We're talking from you're talking from your car. You got an Oculus there. Hopefully you wear your Oculus while you're driving, although that would be
No,
interesting.
no,
So,
no. I
Someday.
wouldn't do that.
someday.
No.
We'll look forward to it.
That's awesome, man. Cool. Yeah, big fan of your content too. So,
Well, thank you.
yeah, that's rad. We need to have you back on pretty soon. I have a feeling Bruno might be a regular guest pretty soon. So hopefully. So,
Well,
well,
thanks for having me, guys. This is a ton of fun, and I hope that we can connect with the community. And
Yeah.
don't hesitate to send me things throughout the week.
for sure.
Uh, I'm happy to share whatever you've got there.
For people who want to get a hold of you or learn more about you, how would they do that?
Well, so there are many ways to do that. I think the place that I spend most time on outside of work, where you can easily find me, is LinkedIn.
Mm,
Um, I spend a little bit of time on Twitter, but Twitter is more of a struggle for me because I'm interested in having a relationship with folks where I know where they come from and we can connect, from a professional standpoint. I don't feel like I get that on Twitter. I feel like Twitter is more of a kind of publishing platform for
mm,
folks. And so LinkedIn is probably the best way. Just ping me, and then there I have my information, my email address, and so forth. So by connecting with me on LinkedIn is probably the best way to do it.
nice. Awesome. Cool. I have to
And
have
then
you
of
back
course,
on. For sure.
there is those Sunday carcasts that I do, and then
That's
there's
right.
also every Tuesday morning we have this program called Data Journeys, where I
Mm,
interview a customer, and this I think might be interesting to your community because this is not a marketing exercise, right? I'm not asking them, hey, tell me everything you like about the Google Cloud. Wow, I
mm.
really need the glasses now because the sun is getting up. So I'll put the glasses back on, but it's about the data journey is about a platform for the community to tell me what they've learned. And so I'm asking
Mm,
them typically 3 questions. One is, tell me about you and your company. Two, tell me about the use cases. What does your architecture look like? Help us understand how you succeeded. And then three is, what are the do's and the don'ts? What would you do again? And what would you say, maybe made sense when you got started, but then really, in retrospect, was not the right step to take. And so that's typically kind of what we do. And that's every Tuesday morning. So again,
that's awesome.
best way is just follow me on LinkedIn, and then you'll get those updates ongoing.
Cool. That's awesome. Yeah, like one of my favorite content people is you in the data space. So, everyone here, subscribe, smash the like button on his videos on YouTube as well. Great channel there. Great audience questions. We did not get to actually very many of them, unfortunately. So that means we'll have to have you back on soon. Yeah. So apologies to the audience whose questions we did not answer, but it is what it is. So cool. And next week we have George Farrakhan joining us on the Monday morning data chat. So that's gonna be a lot of fun. He's a good friend and it's always insightful. So, and we have a roster of guests actually coming up. So stay tuned for more announcements on that. Awesome. And in the meantime, subscribe to our YouTube, Ternary Data, ternarydata.com. You can get our newsletter. We have exclusive articles every week that you can only find there. And like our company page on LinkedIn if you want, Ternary Data. And I guess we'll see you next Monday. So cool. Bruno, have fun.
Thank you,
Drive
guys.
safe.
Have a good one.
Yeah,
Thanks
take
for
care, buddy.
joining.
All right.
Fantastic comments and thoughts.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Take care, buddy.
Bye bye.